flagship program in this state, right? And
a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit, a bullshit.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another thrilling edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. My name is Michael Wein, and joining me tonight, as always, fellow Longhorn fan and my fantastic co-host, Mr. Nixon. Tuesday, August 6th, 8:12 p.m. We have a lot to get into tonight, including the latest intel from yesterday and this afternoon's practice in Texas fall camp. Today being the first full padded practice that Texas has had in fall camp since it began last Wednesday. We are going to continue our positional personnel previews for this 2024 Texas football team by talking about the quarterbacks, which I'm sure you all want to hear about, and the running back position, a position that's very interesting going into 2024. And then we will dive deeper into our last set of teams that we have before we really go deep into the SEC for basically the rest of the season. So, if you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel, like our videos. That would be a fantastic help to us. We greatly appreciate it. And let me go ahead and welcome in my co-host, Mr. Emmy Nixon. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good, man. I did about an hour and a half of prep before this episode. Just trying to make sure I'm, being as detailed as possible on these dit holes, man. I think I've been really motivated here lately, keeping up with this Texas football team. We're getting closer and closer to the season, and it's starting to feel real now. Like it's starting to feel locked in. I've been really feeling excited for this upcoming season.
We are officially, as of today, as of right now, 25 days away from the Colorado State game to open the season in 2024 for the Texas Longhorns. And we're about 1 week into fall camp now. So as we transition into our first segment of the day, which is the fall camp intel and what both of us are hearing going into, I guess, the second week of camp as they started full padded practice today, I do have some breaking news that I have to share, and it's not great news. Sorry to start the show off on a kind of dim note, but I have to share some breaking injury news on the Texas front. And as I said, it's not great news. This could be the first set of kind of some adversity for this Texas team in 2024. Now, it's been reported and confirmed by Texas media members that were live at practice today in the media availability window that Texas sophomore running back CJ Baxter sustained a knee injury during practice on Tuesday today, which forced him to leave practice. According to those close to the situation, the injury occurred when Baxter was tackled during practice. He's going to receive an MRI tonight to determine the severity of the injury. Nobody close to the program is 100% sure how serious or unserious the injury is. Updates are soon to come. Again, fingers crossed that it's nothing serious.
Right.
We saw, and we're going to talk more about the running back position promptly tonight, but we know how Texas has recruited the position. So we know they have depth there, not all proven, but we know they have talent and depth at the position. But it's just not a great start for CJ Baxter, given he was a guy that was notoriously banged up last year. But the most important thing right now is hoping that that's nothing serious that forces him to miss an extended, long period of time. Any reaction to the CJ Baxter news before we go?
Well, I just think it's really unfortunate. I mean, whether it's serious or not, these training camp weeks are very important. And last year, as you said, he was banged up, like really right from the beginning of the season. He had that shoulder problem. And that I think really put a damper on what he could have achieved in his freshman season. So hoping for the best here, but also just if he can get back and still be able to practice with the team and get as many reps in as possible here in these training camp weeks, that's got to be the priority for him.
The silver lining from what I'm hearing, and this has been directly reported from the guys at On Texas Football, Bobby Burton, Jerry Hamilton, and CJ Vogel, is that Baxter himself did not hear a pop in his knee when the injury occurred, which
Okay.
can be viewed as a positive, but the fact that he's still going to get an MRI as of tonight still leaves a level of concern there.
Right.
So the hope is, if you're a Texas fan, is that this is nothing that forces him to miss a significant period of time. Now, having said that, let's get into some more exciting things that have been happening in fall camp. I will let you start us off. Where do you want to take us first? I have a list of about 6 notes. You have a list of your own, so you start us off with what you're hearing and what's caught
I
your
wanted to start in the wide receiver room actually.
eye.
I I've heard some really good things about DeAndre Moore. The current trio of starting receivers is Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, and DeAndre Moore, as we know. Um, and to me, what like the best thing that I could have heard is what came out today is that DeAndre Moore has really embraced doing the little things, the dirty work within this offensive unit. And to me, with kind of the stature of the names of Bond and Cook, to me, those 2 spots are pretty much locked into the starting lineup. I think the third spot is the one that's sort of up for grabs, but it seems like to me, based on what I just heard today, with the ability to block that DeAndre Moore showed, I think if he's able to do those things, he's going to be locked into that third spot. He had a really good block on a bubble screen on Malik Muhammad that opened up a huge play within the scrimmage multiple different times. I think he won't be really in like a Jordan Whittington role where he's going to get like significantly less targets than the other 2 guys, but I think it definitely matters that he's still going to have that type of mindset. I think that's very important.
Here's what I'll say on the wide receivers, and then we'll move on to what I'm want to talk about first. I think it's very clear that there's going to be an extended rotation at the wide receiver position, consisting of primarily 6 guys. And that's the guys you think of on the front line, right? It's the guys you mentioned that have been working with the starters pretty consistently. Jonte Cook, Isaiah Bond, DeAndre Moore. And then there's been that second group of Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, and Ryan Wingo. I think it's very clear that they're going to work in those 6 guys very consistently as much as they can. And I think a lot has played into that. The emergence and the consistency early on from Ryan Wingo is something that we're probably not talking about enough.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about more as we get closer to the season and we hear what's actually going on in these full padded practices. Texas is going to have their first scrimmage this Saturday. There will be reporting from that. That's really where we're going to get to see for the first time, like who has it and who may be struggling a little bit. What's the 2 deep really look like? We'll see that in that scrimmage, and we'll probably hear a lot more about the quarterbacks at that point in time. But I do think you're going to see more 11 personnel this year than you saw last year and in years past with Texas because of this extended wide receiver rotation. Texas is going to want to get more 3 wide receiver sets on the field, meaning you have one running back, which will probably be CJ Baxter, hopefully, if he's not severely injured, and or Jadon Blue, or maybe Trey Wisner factors into that equation more than we think now because of the CJ Baxter health situation. I think there's going to be a lot more 3 wide receiver sets. I don't know about 4 wide. Texas hasn't really done that a lot in the past for good reasons, and this trend has extended beyond like the year Sark has been here the past 3 years. Tom Herman didn't really go to a lot of 4 or 5 wide receiver sets because Texas has always kind of wanted to deploy a tight end in its offense, because having that tight end on the field kind of allows you to not really tip your hand as to what you're doing offensively. You could be running, you could be passing. That's the general sense. And so I think that's your takeaway right there is we're kind of seeing a consistent rotation. We're seeing some guys emerge. I'm hearing really good things about Isaiah Bond all of a sudden. That's great to hear. I've heard really good things about Matthew Golden. That's awesome. We heard about Silas Bolden very early on. Like, the depth at the position is awesome. It's who's going to emerge as the guys, like the workhorses, the stars, and what does it mean? Like, what kind of personnel groupings are they going to deploy? Because I think it could be a lot different than what we've seen in years past. Anything you want to add to that before I get into the number one thing that stood out to me from the past couple of days?
Yeah, I'll keep this quick. Just like, I think, just to add on to what you were saying, just the roles of those 6 guys as well. Like, obviously you mentioned like the stars, but also I think there's going to be certain guys that are going to be put in as the deep threat, or like kind of more of like possession wide receiver, which is where I see Ryan Wingo right now. So I think that will all kind of fall into place, and it might even take 5-6 weeks into the season for it to kind of fall into place. But I think we're in a really good spot either way.
I agree. Now, I have a couple notes really fast, one on offense, one on special teams, but the majority of my stuff for tonight is on defense. Okay? I'll get your quick reactions to both of these things. Number one, pretty simple. Up until the injury today, of course, and we'll probably get news of that later tonight, probably tomorrow at this point. The update on CJ Baxter. We hope that's good once again. But to no one's surprise, those 2 guys have kind of been platooning first team reps. They've been rotating in and out, taking the first team reps. That's no surprise to anyone. Some people think Jadon Blue's going to emerge as the next 1,000-yard breakout star at running back that we've seen in years past, like last year with Jonathan Brooks. Some people are still in the CJ Baxter camp. I don't know that I'm in one or the other. I think both can be great. I think both have their different strengths and weaknesses. But the note here is that freshman running back Jarrett Gibson out of IMG Academy, he was a high 4-star, borderline 5-star guy recruited out of IMG Academy down in the state of Florida, has been taking the first carries at third team running back. And the reason I think that's important is because even if CJ Baxter's injury is not serious, I still think they're going to need one of those 2 freshmen, whether it's Christian Clark or Jared Gibson, emerge in some type of role just because of the nature of the season and how long this season could end up being. I think it's great to hear a guy like Jarrett Gibson, who a lot of people actually had questions about, how good he actually is coming in. I think he's great. I think Christian Clark might even be a little bit better. But regardless, like, if freshmen are taking 13 reps and are on the brink of potentially cracking the 2 deep this early on, that's a fantastic thing to hear. That's what you want to hear. I mean, with a guy like Jared Gibson, you would hope to hear that he's cracking the 2 deep by year 2. The fact that he's doing it a week into fall camp when he's been on campus for about 7 months now is really, really, I think, important. And then the second thing I want to mention is on special teams. A lot of people don't really talk about this, but Texas, with Ryan Sanborn leaving, is going to be relying most likely upon either a walk-on or a freshman scholarship player at punter this year. Michael Kern, who was in this 2024 recruiting class out of St. Thomas Aquinas down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, recruited. We didn't talk about him in our 2024 signing day video, but he was a part of this recruiting class, and he looks good in fall camp at punter. That's good to hear. Now, we'll see what it actually looks like when he punts in front of 100,000 people. He is competing with a couple walk-ons, but you'd rather hear that he looks good than he doesn't look good, right?
Yeah.
And on the other end of those punts, it's been Isaiah Bond, at least for the past couple of practices, yesterday and today, taking the first team punt returner reps, and Jonte Cook taking the second team punt returner reps. So any reaction to those two notes before we talk defense here for the next 10 minutes?
Well, I read about the punter situation. I find that very intriguing. I think we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. I think it'll be more so about consistency throughout camp in terms of who's going to win that job. So I think in a week or two we'll know a lot more on that front. And then the return specialist news, I actually hadn't heard that part. That is a bit surprising, just because I find punt return to be a little bit more of, you want that guy to be a bit of more of a return specialist, so you don't put one of your main few wide receivers under that line of fire, I guess. But I guess since the wide receiver room is so deep, I guess it affords Texas the ability to put Bond there.
Yeah, and I do think that Matthew Golden, who's been a fantastic kick returner in his career, the kick return job, that's his job to lose at this moment in time. I mean, I could see some other guys factoring in, maybe even a Jadon Blue type, who's, I think, returned kicks in the past. But with the uncertainty around CJ Baxter and his health, I don't know that they want to risk putting a guy like that out there. I mean, Jadon Blue might be a guy who ends up on the front lines in the Texas running back room this year, regardless of what CJ Baxter is or isn't, hurt or not. Like, some people think that Jadon Blue is the breakout guy on this team. And we've heard really good things about him. But I think Matthew Golden, like that, what he's proven in his college career at that position, that's his job. The punt return situation and the punting situation as a whole is interesting on both sides of the equation. On defense, what are you hearing? What are the things, the birdies that you're kind of getting from your intel that you're reading?
One thing that we had actually talked about briefly before the show began was Alex January,
Yep.
freshman from DeSoto, getting second team reps at defensive tackle, and that's notable because this defensive tackle we've talked about at length, being a room where we brought in a lot of transfers, a lot of veterans, a lot of bodies to kind of bring in and rotate. And if you put Alex January into the mix now you're looking at a room with a little bit more upside, in my opinion. And I think in order for him to get that second spot now, he would have had to have jumped Tia Savea, which I find interesting, but I also think Tia Savea is more of a run stuffer, early downs type of player anyway. So I think it's good news.
So here's what I take from that, as I have heard this exact same thing. Number one, it's interesting that Vernon brought in Alfred Collins a week into camp are still the starters on the defensive line. That looks to be, I think it's going to take a real effort from one of these other guys to surpass those two guys as the frontline starters on the interior defensive line going into game one here in the next couple weeks. That might be tough. I think those guys are pretty solidified. Otherwise, I think they would be rotating Vernon Broughton with many other guys that they've brought in on the first team aside Alfred Collins this week to kind of see what they have. We'll see how they do in the scrimmage, and now that they're in full pads, we'll kind of hear more. But I think that's pretty much, barring injury or something crazy happening, that could be tough to overcome. But hearing that Jermaine Lole and specifically Alex January have been working with the second team some here the past couple practices, is significant, especially on January's front, because number one, January's a freshman. He was a mid to high 4-star prospect from the Dallas Metroplex area, a pipeline that Texas has recruited severely here the past couple of years. Here's what I think it means. I think the fact, kind of similar to what we talked about with Jarrett Gibson, I think the fact that he's even getting the opportunity to potentially be a two-deep guy, this early on is significant for one reason and one reason only. We talked about this in our defensive line preview. Texas has depth. They have experienced depth with the 3 transfers that they brought in and the 2 returning guys on the interior of their defensive line this year. How proven that depth is or isn't, we'll have to find out, right? How good can they be, or can they be great? Can Alfred Collins emerge as an all-American type or all-SEC type? That would be huge, obviously. Can one of the transfers become a really solid player? They got 3, so they really kind of have a 1-in-3 shot at one of those guys becoming like something greater than just solid or good. But all 5 of those guys run out of eligibility after this year. So you're losing basically all of your experience on the defensive line. So if Alex January, who's a freshman, can work his way in to the 2-deep, even if he's not a starter, which I don't think he will be this year, but if he can work his way into that rotation and get some consistent reps and be a reliable player for you, even like just an above replacement kind of guy in his freshman season, that could mean one less guy that you may or may not have to take in the portal next year on the defensive line. Because we saw Texas had to go heavy this year on the defensive line in the portal, obviously with the 2 studs that they lost. But having not to do that every single year would be huge. And if guys like this, Alex January, or if a Sadir Mitchell can emerge, who's been working more with the third team in that rotation, that's big, because you don't want to have to be going into the portal to try to find guys to stopgap at that position in the SEC when not a lot. It's rare that the elite of the elite defensive tackles enter the portal. You just don't want to have to be relying upon that. And so it's great to see that Alex January is emerging for that particular reason, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely, man.
A couple other things. Jalen Gilbo, who's surprisingly enough been taking all the first team reps at the star position, or the nickel corner, slot corner, if you want to call it that. He broke down the team during the media viewed portion of Texas practice. Coming out of the stretch portion of their practice, he was the guy who broke down the team and transitioned them into their next segment, which I guess was individual drills or group drills, whatever they do. And the reason I think that's significant is because other notable players to have done that exact same thing, breaking down the team, coming out of stretch period when the media is watching, have been guys like Quinn Ewers, Kelvin Banks, Anthony Hill, guys that the staff views as leaders on this team. I think that could be, if nothing else, a little bit of insight into how this staff actually views a guy like Jalen Gilbo, a young guy who's really taken another step, both in the spring, going into the summer, and now in the fall, taking all those first team reps, taking Jahdae Barron's job for what it's worth, at least for the moment. I think that says a lot. I think Texas is sending a message by having him break down the team when the media is watching. That's a subliminal message to us as Texas fans and to the media that we think of this guy really, really highly. He's something to possibly get excited about this year. Did you have any thoughts on Gilbo? I have
Yeah,
one more
definitely.
note.
I think he's been the talk of camp in terms of the secondary.
Yep.
He's been so good. It's been really good to see him emerge like this, man. I think it's exactly what this secondary needs. Just an injection of just speed and juice at that star position where I think he's physical enough to be able to make an impact in run support as well.
Yeah. My last note, and you can add whatever else you may or may not have. Yesterday, I don't know about today, but yesterday, Jelani McDonald was working at first team safety alongside Michael Taff in place of Derek Williams. And Andrew Makuba, the transfer from Clemson, was still working on second team along with Xavier Filsaime. What does that mean? I don't know. Like, it probably means nothing. I think, as I mentioned in our last episode, Derek Williams is pretty much locked into that starting spot. He's not going anywhere. In fact, I think from what I've heard early on is he was back in his starting role today. What I think this is similar to the situation with Alex January, is with the elongated season and what could be a 16 or 17 game season, if Texas really achieves what its potential is, which is getting back to the semifinals or maybe even playing for a national championship, you're going to need to have bodies and depth at all positions. And they want to know, they want to see, can Jelani McDonald, even though I think right now he's working behind, Jalen Gilbo at that star position, could he potentially be a guy that's capable of plugging in at safety if needed? I think that's significant that they're experimenting with these kinds of things right now with the elongated season. But I think it's interesting that the one constant so far in the secondary really has been, well, obviously Malik Muhammad at corner, but the one real constant has been Michael Taff at that one safety spot. He's been the guy that's on the field at all times. So that's interesting too. Any thoughts on the safety position before we move on here?
Yeah, I think it's really good that we have four guys that we are comfortable with starting. I think Makuba probably has a way to go in terms of acclimating to the system and the program. But I think by the time week one hits, he'll be in a spot as well where any of those four guys on the field, any combination, and Kwiatkowski will be comfortable with that, I think.
Yeah. Any other intel notes you wanted to get into as of right now?
One thing that I wrote down was to keep an eye on Leona Lafau in terms of special teams coverage. He's been making waves in terms of punt and kick coverage. He still has a way to go as a linebacker, but as of right now, I think he's going to be our star guy on special teams, kind of like how Keelan Robinson was last year in a way, but
Mhm.
obviously in a different type of body type.
Yeah, Sark had rave words for Leona Lafau, who I've actually heard is working directly behind Anthony Hill as the backup at that linebacker position, which is significant. Texas needs beyond Mo Blackwell, who I kind of view more as like a specialist kind of linebacker, the third down kind of
Yeah,
coverage speed linebacker type.
definitely.
They need another guy that, say, if David Binda goes down, can plug in to one of those inside linebacker spots and be at least a replacement level player at that position. That's why I said, I think in one of our last episodes, when you kind of put me on the spot, who are the guys Texas absolutely cannot afford to lose this season? Anthony Hill was one of those guys. But in our next dit hole, the position groups we'll be talking about are the edge and the linebackers. So we'll get more deep into that then.
Right.
Where do you want to go next? Do you want to go to our team previews, or do you want to talk about more about this Texas team, the quarterbacks and the running backs?
Let's go quarterbacks and running backs.
Okay.
That's where a lot of my prep went. And uh, in particular, in our notes, we had on the docket a Quinn Ewers checklist. And what this is going to be, what this is going to look like in this segment is just we're going to have a list of 3 things. I guess a wish list in a way that we hope Quinn Ewers will show improvement on in 2024. And I'll go first. My number one thing, and this is in no particular order, um, is I want to see Quinn Ewers improve against the blitz. I think he wasn't bad against the blitz. Don't get me wrong. Um, you know, I think he was very smart in terms of finding the check down and finding the outlet, hitting guys out in space. But to me, I think there's another level to go in terms of identifying the blitz as well as just punishing teams for blitzing. What do we see so often in the NFL with some of these top guys, the Joe Burrows of the world, Patrick Mahomes of the world? If you blitz them, they will punish you with a deep pass down the field. They'll just stand in that pocket, wait as long as they need to, buy that time, and just absolutely rip it down the field. And those are the back-breaking plays for a defense. When you sell out and blitz a guy and he hits you on a 50-yard bomb and flips the field, those are the type of plays that Texas needs in order to be a top offense in college football, in my opinion. I think that's the next step that he can take.
Yeah, absolutely. My number one thing for Quinn, not my number one, but one of the things, like you said, no particular order, is I just want to see him improve his resiliency in the pocket. What do I mean by that? Well, I just want to see. I mean, look, last year he made a desired effort to change his body in one particular way. He cut down on fast food. He got lighter. He got leaner, and that helped him in his mobility, his ability to run. We saw a lot of times last year where he ran. He made plays with his legs. How fast is he, or how good of a runner is he? Well, that's up for our own debate. I think in the past, scouts and us have agreed he's kind of like a average-ish athlete compared to some of these other quarterbacks. But I want to just see him stand strong and deliver the ball in the face of pressure. This kind of actually plays into what you're saying about the blitz. I think too many times when I have watched him the past couple years, sometimes he just doesn't keep his eyes up and he succumbs too fast to even like mild or moderate levels of pressure.
Right.
I think some of that is to protect his body to some degree, given some of the hits he has taken have resulted in injuries, which haven't helped this Texas team. But I think standing firmer against the rush, keeping his eyes up and delivering the football can help. And I do think the fact that he's up about 15 pounds and is stronger in his lower body can help that. But just that resiliency in the pocket, staying strong, standing firm, and delivering the football in the face of pressure. Completed 51.5% of his throws when pressured last year. So I think he just needs to improve upon that. And then secondly, this is probably one of your notes. He's vastly improved from where he was his first year at Texas, but he still's got to be more accurate, or I'd like him to be more accurate and consistent on those deep balls. On throws of 20 plus yards last year, he completed 34% of his attempts. It feels like that can get better. And it feels like Texas has the speed now to, if he can take advantage of it, would really elevate this offense and then to another level. And so I think the inconsistency that we've seen at times, hitting the deep ball a little bit too infrequently, can really take this offense to another level. Do you have anything else you want to say on the deep ball? Was that part of your list, I'm assuming?
Yes, actually. My third thing on the list was accuracy as a whole. I think just ball placement in general. Because to me, the deep ball for him has never been about arm talent. He has all the arm talent needed. To me, it's more about ball placement. And sometimes you see that as well on some of those crossing routes, 8 to 10 yards down the field. Sometimes he'll lead a guy a little too far or kind of have it behind on the receiver's hip. Little things like that, I think, will maximize the amount of run after catch this offense will be able to create. And those types of things are very important in the SEC, where you're playing some of the top defenses in the country. You can't leave meat on the bones. That's going to be a very, very key, is just hitting the throws that are there and making the most out of them.
Yeah, and to your point, when he has connected, they've made the most out of it.
Right.
On throws that he connected on last year, 36.3 yards per catch on those completions, and they scored touchdowns 25% of the time that he completed throws of that distance. So it has a massive payoff when you can do that and connect pretty consistently. And look, I'm really just asking, I would like to see it go from 34% last year to, say, a little over 40% this year.
Yeah.
I'm not asking
45.
for even 50%, but
Right.
anywhere between 40 and 45%, I think, is a range where most of the top quarterbacks sit when you look at college football the past couple of years. My third thing, and it's actually surprising when you hear these numbers, more consistency on throws between 0 and 9 yards. The short to intermediate, like throws that you would say watching on TV are easy, but throws that he needs to complete more often. Last year on throws on attempts of 0 to 9 yards, Quinn Ewers completed 74% of them, 6.8 yards per attempt and 9.2 yards per completion. And he actually had his worst touchdown to interception ratio, 6 touchdowns to 3 interceptions on throws of that length. On all other throws at any other distance, his touchdown to interception ratio was 16 touchdowns to 3 interceptions, whereas 0 to 9 yards, it was 6 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. On the surface, 74%, 9.2 yards per completion, like that doesn't sound too bad. But when you compare it to the elite of the elite at the quarterback position in college football, it's not good enough.
Right.
And he's got to improve there. Carson Beck hit 85% of those throws at 7.5 yards per attempt. Shador Sanders last year hit 84% of throws between 0 and 9 yards at 7.6 yards per attempt. Even Jalen Milroe, who was as erratic as it could be some at points in times last year, completed 86% of his throws between 0 and 9 yards at 8 yards per attempt. Collectively, those three had a touchdown to interception ratio of 21 touchdowns to 2 interceptions in this passing range, whereas Ewers had a 6-3, only a 2-1 interception or touchdown to interception ratio. So that has to get better.
Yeah.
I think
And,
what's
and
hurt.
that plays into like my point on overall accuracy for sure.
Yes. Yes.
Just screen passes, little things like that. And I think a little bit is his throwing motion, I think, where tip passes come into play a little bit more with him, I think. And obviously those are a little bit out of your control at that point, but it is something to keep an eye on for sure. My second thing, but I guess now is my third thing that I'm going to name, is kind of plays into your point of standing stronger in the pocket, but I worded it a bit differently. I want to see him create late in the play more often, and what I mean by that is just when a play breaks down and hasn't gone to plan the way Sark had wanted or the way it was drilled in practice. I want to see him just be able to, as you mentioned, stand stronger in the pocket and kind of let the play develop a bit more on some of those. And also just this is something we talked about last year also, is know when to escape the pocket as well, and escape with the mindset of throwing down the field. I think a lot of times when he escapes, he becomes a runner right away, and he's able to get yards out of that for sure. We saw him do that in the Oklahoma game a little bit, but that ended up being a fumble. Obviously, that was maybe that's not the greatest example, but it popped in my head. But the point being, I think escaping the pocket as a thrower, first and foremost, I think will be a key step in his game. And I think that would impress scouts as well. I think this is a more so than anything for him, an NFL draft audition this year.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to finish this discussion wholeheartedly on Texas quarterbacks and Texas running backs. I want to talk a little bit about Arch, maybe even some about Trey Owens, and then we have a lot to get to on the Texas running backs. So we're gonna have to push team previews for tonight. So we'll get, I promise, we'll get to Florida State, we'll get to Ohio State more in depth. We'll talk about Oregon, we'll get to our SEC teams. But for tonight, since the team intel segment took up 30 minutes, which I was not expecting, we're going to keep it to Texas roster talk for today, because I don't want to shortchange anything in this environment that we call deep in the heart of Longhorn sports.
Right.
So, what is your overall prognosis on Quinn Ewers in 2023? I guess you can take that a lot of ways, like your expectations. What's your prediction? Do you think he gets better from last year? In what ways? It's a loaded question, but I ask your prognosis just as like your overall opinion going into 2024 on Quinn?
Well, I think we are going to see improvement, man. I think a lot like what we need to remember sometimes as Texas fans, maybe not us, but just as a whole, is that Quinn was still a very young player last year. In his second year as a starter, he was still a very young player, and um, he had to lose weight. He had to lose the bad weight last year, and that was a step he had to take. But this year, he's put on good weight, which is that functional strength, as you mentioned, lower body strength. Um, and I think in ways that we mentioned him standing stronger in the pocket, I think he'll just be able to trust his body more to be able to take those hits. And he's primarily a pocket passer, so he has to be able to do that in order for Texas's offense to reach the status that we want it to reach. So I think we will see a ton of improvement. I think it'll be more about, you know, can Texas win those close games where it comes down to a 3rd and 8, a 3rd and 11 type of scenario in a fourth quarter? Quinn has been able to deliver on those before, but the SEC is a whole different ballgame, as we know.
Yeah. All right. We might circle back around to Arch and to Trey Owens, but let's talk about the running backs, because the news that we led off with tonight was unfortunate news, but CJ Baxter did suffer some kind of knee injury that has forced him to get, or is going to get, an MRI at some point this evening. We hope for good news on that. But let's talk about the running backs for this year, and let's start with CJ Baxter. I'll start with you. Your thoughts on CJ Baxter? What are realistic expectations for CJ Baxter, assuming he's healthy in his sophomore season?
Well, I think the expectation is just improvement in terms of, I guess, the more mature things as a running back. Obviously, any running back with any type of talent is going to be able to make a guy miss in the open field and, you know, turn on the jets once they reach that second level. But to me, when it comes to young running backs, and I think especially so with CJ Baxter, because he's such a big physical runner that has to kind of create that um, forward momentum, I guess, kind of get going forward. Um, that I think the vision, I think, should take a step forward this year. I think that's a fair expectation, as well as just, I think with his style of running, I want to see his physicality wear down defenses. We see that with a lot of NFL running backs with a physical running style. Late in the game, the defenses don't want to tackle Derrick Henry late in a football game. And obviously, CJ Baxter is not built like Derrick Henry. That's crazy. Nobody is. But my point is just that I think for this running back room to reach the heights that we want it to reach, which is I know I say that saying a lot with every position group, but CJ Baxter, I think, has got to impose his will physically. That's going to be his role.
So I think here's what I'll say on CJ Baxter, because I listen to a lot of stuff that's out there, and I think the criticism of CJ Baxter's freshman year from a lot of Texas fans and Texas-centric media has been a little over the top.
Yeah, I
but
agree.
But most of it, I do actually think is fair. Here's what I'm going to say, though. He saw a good bit of action through all the injuries in his freshman season. He was the guy that took the first snaps of the season when all of us, for the longest time, thought it would absolutely at least be Jonathan Brooks, right? I mean, I think that's what we thought.
Definitely.
He's Sark's boo. Like, this is a guy that Sark loves. Sark absolutely loves CJ Baxter. And for some services, he was the number one running back in the country coming out of high school last year. I think the good things he showed were toughness, playing through some nagging injuries, production. He did actually produce a decent amount, and just maturity. Those things, he checked those boxes to certain extents in his freshman season. But run maximization is going to be my theme with CJ Baxter in 2024. We obviously know Texas is supposed to have and does have, at the very least, a very good offensive line. They're supposed to have a great offensive line, but at the very least, if it's healthy, it's very good. It seemed like, and it's a lot to ask of a freshman, even a 5-star freshman, if you want to consider CJ Baxter that. It's a lot to ask, but it just felt like he wasn't really adding a lot to well-blocked run plays last year. Now, having said that, he did total 659 rushing yards and caught 24 balls out of the backfield on 6.5 yards per catch, which made him, a decent option out of the backfield. Not as good as Jaden Blue, but especially later on in the season, we saw him get more touches. A guy who can and is capable of catching the football at least out of the backfield. The criticism with CJ Baxter was 4.8 yards per carry last year as a freshman, behind a really good offensive line. An offensive line that maybe wasn't on Michigan or Washington's tier. And it's funny because those two teams matched up in the national championship, but was at the very top of that next tier. I think we both agreed last episode when we talked about the offensive line. Whereas Blue averaged 6.1 yards per carry. It just felt like even though he was working through some nagging foot, rib, and hip injuries, which to his credit, he fought through a lot of that pain, showed the toughness, showed the maturity, the lack of run maximization was, I think, a common source of frustration for a lot of Texas fans, because lots of Texas fans, I'm not including you or me, obviously, in this equation, see that high 4-star rating, they see the 5-star rating, and they automatically assume, like, this guy should be great right away. And that's not everyone, guys, is Bijan Robinson. Like, it's different. I think Texas fans are kind of spoiled at the running back position, and that's kind of spews what they think of CJ Baxter's freshman season. But it is fair to say that Baxter needs to, as you mentioned, be more physical as a runner. But not only that, I think running too upright, because he's a bigger guy, right? He's 6'1", 6'2"-ish, 220, 230 pounds, right? He's a big back. I think too often last year, from what I saw, just watching the games, I would notice that he was running too upright, bad pad level, which is dangerous for running backs that big because it presents more surface area for defenders to hit you. And that is, I think, where a lot of the soft tissue injuries could have come into play. The shoulders, right? Getting hit in the shoulder, not having proper pad level, I think running with a lower pad level and presenting less frame, presenting less of a target for tacklers between the knees and the numbers could really help CJ Baxter, because that's where I think those nagging soft tissue injuries can compound over time.
Right.
That's something hopefully he's working on. Getting small at contact, particularly, can help him kind of lean on these defenders and become a more physical back and use what his strengths are to his advantage. Run maximization, maximizing every single run for CJ Baxter,
Right,
is going to be key for him to take that next step, because he's not a guy that is going to burn you for 60-yard touchdowns. He's not the speed guy. He's not the elusive, Barry Sanders, weave in and out,
Yeah.
dodge
Shady
defender,
McCoy. Yeah, no, he's not. He's
shake
not
and
that.
bake. He's not that. But it doesn't mean he can't still be a great running back. He's just got to he's got to maximize his skill set, is what we're saying. Anything else on CJ? Or do you want to talk about Jaden Blue?
Yeah. Let's talk about Jaden Blue. I agreed with everything you just mentioned on CJ. By the way, I think the contact balance, the pad level, all that has got to get better for sure. And that'll be things to watch this season. Now for Jaden Blue though, I think I'm slightly more in the Jaden Blue camp. But I'm not low on CJ Baxter either, if that makes sense. So Jaden Blue is a little bit more of the slasher type, a little bit more quickness, a little bit, I guess, shorter, not as dense, I guess,
Yep.
is a way to put it. So a little bit of a lightning and thunder type of situation is what we're hoping for here. I think Jaden Blue will end up being, in my opinion, a 60-40 lead in this backfield. And obviously in certain matchups, CJ Baxter may be the better back. I fully acknowledge that. But I think Blue, his speed, his ability to turn a 3-yard play into an 8-yard play, little things here and there like that, are things that CJ Baxter hasn't been able to show yet. So that's where I stand on it currently. But I'm interested to hear your take.
I think Jaden Blue, and I do agree with the majority of Longhorn fans in this respect, is the more dangerous runner in this stable of running backs, and one of the most devastating big play weapons on this roster, period.
Right.
Because of his shocking quickness, his speed, his explosiveness, and his combo threat as both a runner and a receiver, which were evident and limited to more extended snaps at the end of last season, right? We know that. I've even seen comparisons to former Bama running back and current Detroit Lions standout running back Jahmyr Gibbs. Those comparisons are bold, and I'm not saying I agree with them, but you don't have to squint too much. In the short time we've seen Jaden Blue, going into now, I think is his junior season, he's a guy who stuck around. Last year, Bijan, the emergence of Jonathan Brooks last year. Like, he stuck around. He's waited for his time. Give credit to him. Could have easily gone into the portal at one point in time. But, like, you don't have to squint too hard to see aspects of maybe a Jahmyr Gibbs kind of mold of running back when he's been on the field. I think when he was on the field, he took advantage of what was a unfortunate season-ending injury to Jonathan Brooks, who I still believe, if Jonathan Brooks doesn't get hurt, he wins the Doak Walker Award for best running back in the country last year. But that's my opinion. You saw the speed on the field. 398 rushing yards. But the most important note, I think, for Blue was 6.1 yards per carry. The 4 touchdowns on passes out of the backfield. That versatility, something Sark talks about a lot, is key. I think just blindly, at full speed, Jaden Blue can be one of the fastest players in college football. On a 69-yard touchdown against Texas Tech, he was clocked at 22.3 miles per hour. And he pairs that straight line speed with elusiveness. And I think he's learning to become more of a slashing kind of running back, as opposed to early in his career where he would cut everything outside the tackles. I think he's learned to run better within the tackles, which I think is good. Everything about his game I like, except ball security. Ball security, we know CJ Baxter's problem. We just talked about it. Blue's problem mainly, and the reason he hasn't already gotten more playing time, has been he's kind of loose with the football at times. And we saw it rear its ugly head in the Washington game. Texas could have easily used that possession. They were driving that possession, and he just sometimes it happens to everybody. But taking good care of the ball this year is going to be something I want to see Jaden Blue do more of, put an emphasis on. And if he does that, like, he could be the kind of dangerous player that both you and me and most other Texas fans think he can be.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't have said it better, honestly. I think just the running between the tackles. What I've read, I think he's put on 10, 15 pounds this offseason just from the spring to now. He's up to, I think, 205 pounds, I think. 210. Can't quite remember off the top of my head there, but I think just ball carrier vision and instincts, he's already shown improvement in that. And I think the strength aspect of it will also play into, I think, ball security as well. I think just having that a little bit of extra weight, be able to run between the tackles amongst all those giant humans, I think you got to have that strength to be able to just hold on to the dang football. Like, I think it was a necessary move by him to gain a little bit of weight.
Yeah. A couple other things on the running back depth chart that I want to talk about before we wrap this thing up, because we do actually, people have another episode to record tonight, or at least we're planning on doing so. Trey Wisner, a guy nobody really talks about when they talk about Texas running backs, but I want to mention for a couple of reasons, because he's currently the guy that is slotted next in line ahead of the freshman behind CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue, that we did see get very limited carries last year at the very end of the season. Most of which I think came in the Texas Tech game, the game they won 50-7. I don't know if you guys remember that one.
Yeah.
A lot of Texas fans remember that fondly for a lot of different reasons. Because it was really Arch.
Fuck them, that's why.
Yeah, and it was really Arch's first game action. But regardless, like, Trey Wisner doesn't get enough attention, in my opinion. He's kind of comparing him to Jordan Whittington. Like, his character to Jordan Whittington is high praise. I don't know if I'm going to go that far yet, because he's still very young. But his selflessness just kind of reminds me of Jordan Whittington. He's so early on in his career. The coaches rave about his effort. They rave about his maturity. Last year he came in as a fourth-string true freshman running back in a crowded position, crowded room. Only managed 12 carries last year. Didn't get much time at the running back position in game. He's already made a name for himself as a special teams maniac. You mentioned Leona Lafau earlier as a guy who could really emerge on special teams, replacing a guy like Keelan Robinson. I think if you want to mention other guys, Trey Wisner's got to be on that list.
Definitely.
6 tackles on kick coverage, including a couple absolute detonations of enemy kick returners. He was a missile on kickoff coverage last year. And I think he's really endeared himself in the running back room, but just overall on this team as a guy that has got surprising physicality for a player who was billed as kind of more of a finesse player coming out of high school from DeSoto last year in the 2023 recruiting class. But I think he's going to play a more significant role as a running back this year. He'll probably get a workload similar to what Jadon Blue got last year. Like his workload will up significantly, but it might not be like starter level reps. I think he'll be that second team guy. But he could be a guy we're talking a lot more about if we don't get the news that we want to hear and CJ Baxter's injury is a little bit more serious than we want. So he's got to be a guy that we at least mention given the news of tonight, which is that CJ Baxter's getting an MRI on his knee. But he's gained weight. I think the weight program has been beneficial to him. He's around, I think, 195, 200 pounds. And I think that's going to only help his cause in earning reps behind Jadon Blue and CJ Baxter. And then the freshmen who are next in line from this 2024 recruiting class, I kind of view them, just for simplicity's sake, somewhat similar to the comparison that we've made between Jadon Blue and CJ Baxter. I view Jarrett Gibson as kind of the no frills, punishing, kind of grinding kind of running back with a penchant for falling forward, making physical, tough runs. He's kind of got Saquon's a different beast, but when you look at Jarrett Gibson as a freshman in college, you can kind of see like he's got some tree trunks for legs. He's just kind of like that physical back. Whereas Christian Clark, I think, is more of the Bijan Robinson mold, the Jadon Blue mold, and that he's more of a slasher with the frame to add some more weight. But one of those two guys, if not both, if injuries happen, are true freshmen that have the opportunity to assert themselves maybe more early on than we thought if things happen like they may have happened today. So, yeah. Any thoughts on those guys before we wrap the show up?
No, not really. I think Gibson, he's done some really good things already in training camp, and as freshmen, hopefully they'll be able to see some time in some of these blowouts that we hope to induce on other teams. But if not, I think just we got to give them time. I think I don't think they're where CJ Baxter was, for example, last year as a guy who is going to come in and already get starting snaps. Like I don't think that's realistic.
Okay. Not to put you on the spot to end the show, but to put you on the spot to end the show, do you have a bold prediction for the running back position for Texas in 2024? It could be anything. But when it pertains to these 5 guys or this running back room, do you have a bold prediction, good or bad, for the running back position that comes to mind in 2024?
I think this running back room is going to be a lot more dominant in the red zone. And we mentioned this in the offensive line episode. how we want the offensive line to impose its will on some of these 4th and short and 3rd and short and these goal line situations. I think this running back room, if I were to pick a number in terms of touchdowns between Blue and Baxter, rushing touchdowns in particular, let's say 14 and a half, I'll take the over.
Okay, I like that. I like the uniqueness of that bold prediction because red zone was an area of struggle last year.
Definitely.
It hurt them in the OU game, not being able to punch it in from the 1 yard line. Like we all remember the Xavier Worthy screenplay that got stuffed. But like they were in that position, they called that play because they could not run the ball from down there.
Yep.
And I think a lot is going to play into that. But I do like that prediction. I really do. Good on you for coming up with that. I just think overall, though, Blue and Baxter, assuming that Baxter's healthy, cross your fingers, should be an effective duo. Ball security is going to be key for both of them. More so for Jadon Blue, but for both of them. I think because both of them actually had third quarter fumbles. When Texas was trying to make their initial surge in that game, they couldn't. One of the reasons they couldn't get over the hump, well, number one was Michael Penix was just lighting them up, start to finish in that game.
Yeah.
But number two was turnovers. And so that's number one focus. Take care of the football. And then each guy kind of has their own niche that they need to improve upon. But I think, let's see, what can my bold prediction be for the running back room in 2024? It could be easy for me to say like Jadon Blue is going to be an 1,000-yard rusher because Sark's track record is he gets 1,000-yard rushers. Or CJ Baxter is going to get 1,000 yards. But I'm going to say
my question for you would be by season's end, where do you think you'll be in the Jadon Blue versus CJ Baxter camp? I would say
by the end of the season, where do I think I'll be in the CJ Baxter Jadon Blue debate amongst Texas fans? You know, my heart wants to say I'll be in the CJ Baxter camp because I'm a recruiting fiend. And I don't know, I have a thing for 5-star running backs.
yeah.
But my brain is telling me I'll be in the Jadon Blue camp. And one of the reasons I think that is I think Jadon Blue, actually my bold prediction is going to be he's going to have 500 plus yards receiving this year.
Ooh,
I think he's going to have a big year catching balls out of the backfield. We saw a lot of it last year when Jonathan Brooks was healthy, when Ewers would check down a lot to his running backs out of the backfield, particularly Jonathan Brooks. And Jonathan Brooks would do a good job of making something out of nothing a lot of times. I think what we've seen in a small sample size already from Jadon Blue in that area, averaging almost 11 yards per reception last year, I think with an increased workload, I think 500 plus yards in the receiving game is on the table, in addition to whatever else he does, you know, in the run game. So, because I like him more, even though I think CJ Baxter is capable in that area, I like Jadon Blue more catching footballs out of the backfield than I do CJ Baxter.
Just
so
more fluidity.
That your prediction is much better in the red zone. What did you say? 14
and a half rushing
14
touchdown.
and a half. rushing
Over.
touchdowns. You take the over. I'll go 500 plus receiving yards for Jadon Blue. Is my
Okay.
prediction.
I like that. All right. So you heard it here first. If you're playing underdog fantasy, prize picks, whatever, keep an eye on those Jadon Blue receiving yards lines. Might be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
But all
If you're
right. Yeah, that was a
you're that much of a nerd
really
like
good
we are,
conversation there.
if you're that much of a nerd like we are on this podcast, yeah, absolutely keep your eye out for the over under Jadon Blue receiving
Yeah.
yards
A
line.
little bit random, but
Um,
that's where we go on this podcast.
before we get to the end, because we do have to end this in the next couple minutes. Any random thoughts on Arch Manning and or Trey Owens before we leave? Just a couple sentences.
Well, like my gut is telling me Arch Manning is just going to be an absolute beast when he gets on the field next year, and I'm
Okay,
just so
good to hear.
excited for that.
Yeah.
Trey Owens, what he showed in the spring game was fantastic.
Yep.
I just question like how patient is he going to be because he's waiting a minimum of 2 more years, so we'll see.
Yeah, we think that. And look, when Arch goes to the NFL after what we think is going to be 2 years of playing starting next year, by then, Diabell will be a freshman.
Right.
By then, KJ Lacey will be a sophomore if he, in fact, signs.
Right.
So, even if Trey Owens gets to that point, is there a guarantee that he's the guy in place of Arch Manning? No, there is not. Absolutely is not. Now, what we saw in the spring game, fantastic. Like, to have that as your third string is not what 90% of college football teams have. Even 95%, I think you could say, don't have a guy like Trey Owens with that arm talent in the third string quarterback slot. Here's my kind of bold prediction for these two guys, like the backup quarterback, this quarterback room, aside from Quinn Ewers going into 2024. I think Arch Manning will have to start 2 games or play in 2 games.
Okay.
Like take significant steps, not garbage time up by 30 point snaps against Louisiana Monroe. I think there's going to come a time in the season, given what we've seen from Quinn Ewers. I hope it's not the case, but all I can do is give you opinions based on what I've seen so far.
Yeah.
And it's better, to not be surprised when these things happen because we've seen it now for 2 years. I think in 2 games, whether he starts the games or not, he's going to have to play in significant. He's going to have significant playing time in significant games this year, at least 2 of them. That's not necessarily a bold prediction because I think it's actually more likely than it is not that happens. But I think that is going to be the case. But Trey Owens, 14 to 21 for 228 yards and 3 touchdowns in the spring game, showed a lot of promise. And what you have to like is his size, more so than anything else. 6'5". He's got the size. He's got the arm strength. From a developmental perspective, you like that prototype. I think they got to work on his delivery, though. He takes a little too long to deliver the football, and his arm slot's kind of weird. So we're not going to dive deep into quarterback minutia right now, but that's something on Trey Owens for you guys to consider.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I'm regardless of what happens, regardless what his future holds, much like Malik Murphy, I'm really rooting for the guy. I am. Okay. That's going to wrap up this edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that discussion. great discussion, by the way. From the fall camp stuff to the quarterback stuff to the running back stuff. Awesome. We covered it all. Much more team previews coming up tomorrow. Once a week moving forward. Not every week, but most weeks on Wednesdays and or Thursdays, I'm going to be doing a recruiting-centric show that will be 30 to 45 minutes for recruiting updates, news, commitment analysis, rumors, intel, whatever it might be. And everything Texas recruiting, you'll want to tune into that. Emmy will be on a couple of them throughout the next couple months, but he won't be on all of them. It will more so be me emptying out everything in recruiting. So make sure you tune into that.
Some transfer portal stuff too. And it won't just be football either. It'll be some baseball, some basketball.
Absolutely.
You'll get it all.
Recruiting. I don't know what we're going to call it yet, but it will be a recruiting show. So that way we don't have to squeeze recruiting stuff into our main dit hole segments going into the season where we're going to be doing game recaps and this and that. All right. Catch you guys in 25, 30 minutes or so on our NFL preview episode for tonight. But that's going to do it for this episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. We'll be back later this week or this weekend to recap more Texas fall camp intel from scrimmages and do more team previews. Hopefully we'll be getting into the SEC with A&M and Oklahoma and Tennessee on our next episode. But until then, and until we see you guys again in 35 minutes, and to our two viewers for the entire show tonight, we thank you very much. And we'll see you next time on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Hook 'em and peace out.
Peace.
Pray that CJ back.